Emenda 34 da Legislatura em Guam is called to order. Can I please ask Senator Dennis Rodriguez to lead us in prayer?
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly Father, we praise and we thank you for bringing us all here together, for giving us another day of life, Lord. We thank you for the opportunity to be your servants here on Guam. Lord, we are mindful of your promise to always be with us and to guide us. We ask that you continue to guide this body, the 34th Guam Legislature, that you bless us and you extend your hand upon us as a representative of your people, Lord. We ask that you always keep in our minds that through your will, our work here is all for you and for the glory of you, Lord. We ask that all of us here are mindful of that, and that your will be done, and that the work that we do here is all for the greater good of the community of Guam. And all this we ask in your name, amen.
Amen. For the recognition of the recipient of Emenda Laza na Mastakalo na Sacrificio, Senator Lee, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of a grateful island and country, we honor Officers Cook 3rd Class Felix Rosario Castro and the family of Officer Cook 3rd Class Felix Rosario Castro for making the ultimate sacrifice in service and defense of our island and country. Inefresi. Ginini mastakulu ginasoku, imastakulum gi kurasonhu, zani masfigu nanina senyahu, hu fresen maisadzu, parabai protehi, zanu defendi, ihinengi, ikutura, ilingwahi, airi, hanum, zanitanu tamoru, niren shaku diretsu ginanazzu ustata, esti hua fitma gi hilui biblia, zani benderahu, banderan guahan.
Senator Agwin, would you please lead us in the Guam hymn? Senator Nicholas. Will the clerk please take roll?
Senator Atta, Senator Uggan, Senator Castro, Speaker Cruz, Senator Espadon, Senator Esteves, Senator Lee, Senator Morrison, Senator Munoz, Senator Nelson, Senator Rodriguez, Senator San Augustine, Senator San Nicolas, Vice Speaker Chalahi, Senator Torres. Mr. Speaker, there is a quorum.
Thank you. Majority Leader?
Mr. Speaker, I move to approve the legislative journals dated November 27, 2017 and January 11, 2018, subject to corrections.
On the motion to approve the legislative journals dated November 27, 2017 and January the 1st, 2018.
Mr. Speaker, there are communications and petitions, and I move that they be appended to today's session journal.
Test 1, 2.
On the motion that communications and petitions be appended to today's legislative journal, hearing no objection, motion carries.
Mr. Speaker, there are messages from Imagalahin Guahan, and I move that they be appended to today's session journal.
On the motion that messages from Imagalahin and Guahan be appended to today's session journal, hearing no objection, motion carries. Mr. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, there are reports of standing committees, and I move that they also be appended to today's session journal.
On the motion that reports of standing committees be appended to today's session journal, hearing no objection, motion carries. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, there are no reports of select committees.
Anything further?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
There being no reports of the select committees, is there anything further under this agenda item? On agenda item 13, introduction.
Well, agenda item 13, the introduction of first reading of bills.
Please.
So, Mr. Speaker, I move that bills introduced, bill numbers 213-34 LS through 216-34 LS, 217-34 COR through 227-34 COR, and 228-34 LS through 230-34 LS. Resolutions introduced, resolution numbers 300-34 LS through 302-34 LS and 303-34 COR through 332-34 COR, and certificates introduced, certificate numbers 196-34 LS and 197-34 COR through 212-34 COR be deemed to have been given their first reading.
On that motion, hearing no objection, motion carries.
Okay, let me just get these. Mr. Speaker, I move that all congratulatory, commendatory, and condolence resolutions and legislative certificates introduced today and for the remainder of this legislative session be considered first read and adopted to allow the Legislative Council to make technical corrections and to add all senators as co-sponsors.
On that motion, hearing no objections, motion carries. Are there any further motions? Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In this particular part of the agenda, I would like to rise under motions for a point of order with respect to an item that I believe may be erroneously placed on today's session agenda. With respect to Resolution 239-34, the resolution was placed on the session agenda without a notwithstanding motion to have it placed on notwithstanding the House rules. That being the case, the motion to place that resolution on today's session agenda was made out of order. And so I wanted to rise to a point of order in this section of motions to inquire as to whether or not, because it was not placed onto the session agenda without a notwithstanding motion, should it be on today's session agenda? And if not, I would like to make a motion to place it in the inactive file, Mr. Speaker.
I had not planned to address that right now. I was,
Just for the record, Mr. Speaker, the standing
that's
rules.
fine.
The standing rules require that in order for the resolution to be placed onto the session agenda, it must have an affirmative vote from the committee that's trying to place it on the agenda. But there were no votes. The required amount of votes for the resolution to be placed on the agenda and reported out of the committee was actually not there. So the motion to place it on the agenda is not only should it not have been done in the rules meeting, but it should not have even been reported out of that committee.
All
So
right.
we're already violating multiple rules by having it get to this point. It's almost like,
let me speak to
Yes, Mr.
parliamentarian.
Speaker.
Just a point of order, Mr. Speaker. I believe that his motion was prefaced questioning whether, in fact, that particular item was placed on the agenda appropriately and consistent with the standing rules. So if I can get clarification before even entertaining the motion that you just proposed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Legislature's back in order. There is a motion on the floor to send Resolution 239 to the inactive file. Senator Uggan has made a motion. Has that been resolved, Senator? Is there an objection? There's been an objection, and Senator Espaldon?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the issue at hand is Resolution 239, which concerns me. And so the question that I present to you, submit to you, is whether or not I can vote on this motion.
Excuse me.
Are we in a recess, Mr. Speaker? Are we in a recess?
No, we're not. We're back on the record now that
Okay.
I have a working microphone.
All right. And just while we're at it, if legal counsel is looking at it, and I just want to clarify if this is a debatable or non-debatable motion.
No, yes. There are two things before us. Let me first just dispose of Senator Uggan's, and then I'll come back to you. All right? As I understand, Senator Uggan had posed an inquiry, and the chair will say that on the advice of the parliamentarian, legal counsel, the resolution is not properly before the body. And so I've asked whether there's an objection. I understand that there is an objection. And so, but you've asked as to whether or not you are to vote. I think the proper motion that the question that the chair will ask is, shall the senator, for the reasons assigned, be excused from voting? And so
Mr. Speaker, just to clarify, the question that you're presenting before the body is whether or not I should be excused from voting. So there is no determination then from a parliamentarian that it's not a clear issue of whether I can vote or not? Or is it one that is reserved to the will of the body?
well, parliamentarian and the chair may have their own view, but the thing is that it is a question that can and should be placed before the body.
Okay,
And so I'm placing it before the body.
okay. And I'll respect that, your ruling, Mr. Speaker. The second question, of course, is whether this is a debatable or non-debatable motion.
No, his. It's not debatable.
Okay, and so you're going to leave it to the will of the body. However, I reserve the ability to speak depending on what the vote would be. And according to the Masons' rules, under the House privilege and personal privilege, because the issue before us is my censorship, I do have the ability to speak. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I understand that. And so the question before the body is, shall the senator, for the reasons assigned and stated, be excused from voting? All those in favor of the motion to excuse the senator, please indicate by raising their hand.
Excuse me, just to clarify the question is all those in favor of excusing me from voting, basically not allowing me to vote, and raise your hand, right?
Yes.
I just want to be very clear. Thank you.
On this?
On this particular motion.
On the motion to send into inactive file.
Thank you.
It's not debatable. All those in favor, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion carries. There's been an objection. All those in favor of, did you wish to speak? The motion to send back to inactive file, unfortunately, is debatable, so.
I'm sorry, it is debatable?
Yes, no. The motion to send back to inactive file is debatable, so those who wish to speak on that motion may speak at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If we can, I would like to ask the mover of the motion to clarify the points and the reasons for moving the emotion or the motion forward, and so then I would be allowed to speak in opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In answering that question, I would, I guess, like to open up by first posing the question for the parliamentarian to respond to. Did the resolution in question receive the votes necessary to even be placed up for a vote?
In a review of the record, the binder that was presented to everyone and that has been available for everybody to review, there were two things in there. One was a voting sheet, and on the voting sheet, there was a column for approved and not approved, specifically denoted. 2 senators voted to approve. 2 other senators created their own column, which wasn't initially in the thing, in the voting sheet, of to report out. And 2 senators signed on that as to not report out. The 2, because one was absent and one was excused. I mean, one had with.
Point of information, Mr. Speaker. You're correct. 2 voted in the affirmative and 3 voted to report out of committee. Under the rules, of the Ethics Committee, they needed 4 affirmative votes to let out of the committee to have a finding. On top of it, the rules specifically say that a vote to report out is not considered. Mr. Speaker, I have the floor.
Let him blend.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I now have to invoke my right under Section 221 of the Masons Rules, which is that privilege of the House, under Section B, questions concerning expelling or censuring a member or the member's capacity to serve. That allows me to speak under the House privilege. And under Section 222, questions affecting the rights, reputation, and conduct of members of the body basically fall under the issue of personal privilege. So I do believe I do have the right under the rules of Masons. Mr. Speaker, all I'm doing is pointing out a point of information, just to make sure that the information that is being transmitted to the body is accurate. And the accuracy, and the fact is that 2 members of the Ethics Committee voted in the affirmative, and I begrudge them nothing for their vote. But in reality, there were 3 who signed off under the report out. And under the rules of the Ethics Committee, a vote to report out only is not considered an affirmative vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm sorry. The chair stands corrected that there were 3 and 1 member, 2 members. But there were only 2 affirmative votes. And in the rules, it does state that there needs to be 4 affirmative votes. 4 affirmative votes, and a do not report out is not considered an affirmative vote. So parliamentarian has informed us that it is not properly before us. That's why, in answer to Senator Ogden's question, I did state that the resolution is not properly before the body.
Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Speaker, if I may, what you had stated was the motion on the floor is whether or not we're sending the resolution back into the inactive file. That is the motion that we're debating at this point. As far as fielding discussion into what happened within the committee, I take exception that anybody but the committee can put out what actually happened in that manner.
I'm not stating anything that happened within the committee. All I'm saying is within the 4 corners of the document that was presented to us, we found a voting sheet, and the voting sheet did not show 4.
Mr. Speaker, I understand. I just want to be afforded the opportunity.
Then you now have the opportunity. I'm just stating the facts as I see it, all right? You may now debate the issue, and we'll take a vote after you finish.
Thank you. The question, what I had requested is that there is a motion on the floor, and what I had asked was the mover of the motion wholly state his position so that I can properly debate and other members of this body could properly debate the motion at hand. So again, I request that the mover of the motion have the ability to speak on the motion and say their piece so that it can be properly debated.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, that was the question, and in part of prefacing my statement, I opened by asking the question, were the votes necessary to bring this resolution forward received? And the answer is no. And so I think that makes it that provides a very clear basis as to why this issue should no longer move forward. Mr. Speaker, we're talking about ethics, and if we're going to be determining the ethical behavior of a member, surely we should follow our own ethics and make sure that we're following the rules as we proceed to do that. Now, our rules are very clear. If you don't have 4 affirmative votes to proceed, then you don't have the votes to proceed. There are no 4 affirmative votes to proceed on this measure. The bottom line, Mr. Speaker, is that in our system of justice, everyone's afforded due process. Evidence was presented, defense was presented, and not enough votes were provided in the affirmative to be able to move the measure forward. It's similar to evidence being presented to a grand jury. If a grand jury doesn't find enough evidence to move the case to trial, it doesn't go to trial. And so the charges are moot, basically, at that point, Mr. Speaker. And so here we are, we're talking about a resolution that's been placed on our agenda that our parliamentarian has ruled shouldn't even be there because the votes necessary to take it to that point aren't there. And so regardless of whatever opinion anyone may hold here, if we're talking about ethics, let's follow our own rules and make sure that we're not going to be pushing forward something that, based on our own standards, our own ethical standards, should not move forward at this time. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator. And as presiding officer, I did see that, but I didn't believe that it was the presiding officer's responsibility to bring that forward, that I was going to wait until someone made the motion, that it wasn't properly before the body. And so it's now been questioned, and the motion is to send it back to the inactive file, and we'll debate that further. Senator, you're recognized. Who wishes to speak after? Then Senator Uggan. Who wishes to be heard after Senator Uggan on the motion? Senator Estevez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While I do understand there are concerns with the current resolution, with guidance from the Ethics Committee to explain what transpired in an effort to be completely transparent with the public, there was a duly convened meeting of the Ethics Commission wherein on the agenda was voting on the adoption of the final draft resolution for submission to the legislature. In that meeting, those that showed that resolution was passed unanimously. Now, afterwards, during the transmission, in keeping with the rules of the legislature, a voting sheet was attached to that after the duly convened meeting, which had unanimous support to move it, 4 or more. Mr. Speaker, what happened then was there was a column, as you had stated, written in, not placed on in black and white, but written in to report out only. And 3 senators did, in fact, initial to report out only. Now, in normal standing rules procedures, a report out only means to move it forward in the process. However, within the Ethics Committee, it can be interpreted as a revote under Mason's manual. Now, the committee honors this assessment from legal counsel, which we had received word only on Friday. The reason we had not been able to address it is because the committee is not able to meet during sessions, as per the rules. It is the intention of this committee to have made the motion to have sent it back to committee. But since we're talking about this at hand, what I find and take exception to is the fact that we're going to use this minor technical error, an error in which I'll take full responsibility of, but error in which what we want to do is honor Mason's manual and honor that vote sheet as what we consider a technical revote and address that into the committee. But I do take exception that we're using this error to give a free pass, to find some reason to dismiss this so we don't have to talk about this important issue with the body. The people of Guam do not want to give any free passes. I have nothing against a good senator, but the Ethics Committee put in time, effort, and resources and taxpayer dollars into this process. And so I do take exception when we try to use this minor technical error, which can be fixed relatively easy, to give a free pass. So, Mr. Speaker, I object to this motion to place the resolution to the inactive file. Thank you.
Senator Uggan.
with regards to opposing the motion to place this measure in the inactive file. So, Mr. Speaker, more or less, we are saying that the Ethics Committee had conducted its business, formulated a resolution, and I'm trying to tread lightly on this because we should not be talking about the specifics. This is a motion to place it on inactive file. But if we place it in an active file, my question then, Mr. Speaker, is will the people of Guam have access to all of these records? Because on May 16, 2017, someone filed an ethics report. The Ethics Committee conducted its business. In September, there was a formulation of a resolution with some of the discussions by the committee members, and I'm not a member of the committee, but there was a resolution that was formulated that highlighted some of the activities that were presented before the ethics body. I stand in opposition of placing this measure in an inactive file because our people deserve to know exactly what decision was made, what findings were presented, and if in fact it's going to be made public record. So, Mr. Speaker, should this amendment pass, I'm going to request that this information, because it would have disposed, should the amendment pass or the motion pass, it would dispose of this measure. It would no longer be entertained. Then I would suggest that this body make all the records readily accessible to the public. And that's my request, because this is a disposition of an issue. And this is not relative to my position on the measure, but our people should be given the opportunity to be able to understand the deliberations of the members of this body, the proposed resolution, as well as the ultimate decision that were rendered by the Ethics Committee members. So, Mr. Speaker, I stand in opposition to the motion to place it on inactive file. Thank you.
I understand your motion to, and I mean that you object to the motion. I am not sure whether or not this body can make the record public. All the proceedings of the Ethics Committee are confidential. And if it's confidential, then it remains confidential until there has been a resolution. And a resolution, when there's no resolution, then we'd have to look at that. But I don't right now, in the same way that the investigations in a grand jury, when there's no indictment, can be made public after it didn't get 19 votes. It just doesn't happen. What's in the press is in the press, but what's in the record and the evidence that was there, which was whatever, is not to be made public. And so that would have to be a separate motion. I will take your comments in objection to the motion, to the motion before the body, but your request to make the record public is going to have to be something completely separate, because it's not addressed in the rules.
Then, Mr. Speaker, then I kindly ask the Speaker to confide in our legal counsel so that in fact, whatever records can be made accessible to the public, our people should know that their legislative body is going to be transparent and open with regards to legislative activities, inclusive of addressing complaints that are filed against any of the members of this body. Thank you very much.
In an attempt to try to keep the record confidential, the record was kept in my office, and every senator was sent a memo that they could make an in-camera review. Two separate notices were sent out to every single member of the legislature, including the respondent. The respondent came and took advantage of that invitation to review it, but I didn't get everybody did not respond to the in-camera review. So I'm just saying, that's the reason why it was kept confidential and has not been published. And I'm not sure we would have to deal with whether or not it's published afterwards, but thank you.
Mr. Speaker, if I could close just based on your invitation, yes. My office did receive an invitation to be able to review the documents. But I felt very strongly that this is an issue that needs to be addressed on this floor. Regardless as to what the recommendations were, that our people should know exactly what the nature of the deliberations are and where we would all vote on that particular issue should it be presented on the floor. So I did not accept the invitation because I felt very strongly that this is the appropriate venue where we can discuss specifics and ensure that it's ultimately addressed by this full body. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
There was no effort to try to get anybody to vote in the office. It was an effort to get everybody to be informed before they came on this floor as to what was in there and what was bringing it forward.
So you're saying, Mr. Speaker, that if I had visited your office and read the documents, that those very same documents would not be open to the public here? In this forum?
Point of information, Mr. Speaker. Under the rules of the Ethics Committee, as it is written in our rules, the information only becomes public if after a vote by the body comes in the affirmative finding an ethics violation. If there is not a finding of an ethical violation, then those records are closed. And so regardless of whether the good senator feels, the rules are the rules. And that really is the essence of this whole argument, that, again, we need to follow the rules. To ask for it to be made public just because somebody feels it should be made public, regardless of whether there was a vote in favor or against it, is not relevant at this point. What is relevant are the rules. Thank you.
I agree, and that's what the chair said. Senator Camacho Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. More to that point, our own sunshine laws under Section 10108, limitations on right of inspection, except as provided for, nothing in this chapter shall be construed to require disclosure of records that are any of the following, and I cite to B, records of complaints to or investigations conducted by, or records of intelligence information, or security procedures, or information of any agency or its personnel. So it's very specific in our own sunshine laws that that sort of disclosure is prohibited. But I actually want to rise of concern to some of the statements made with regard to the votes. I understand that the parliamentarian determined that there were only 2 affirmative votes and that under the rules 4 affirmative votes are required. So I don't think we're in a position to editorialize or to make some determination about whether something is technical in nature, because I believe from my understanding that it was declared by the parliamentarian, and I just wanted a reiteration of that point, because I think we're getting a little caught up in the emotion of this matter, but we really have to keep our heads on and look at what the rules clearly state and what our parliamentarian is directing to us. So, if I may, that's my understanding, and is that correct, Mr. Speaker?
Yes, and I believe the Ethics Committee recognized that because a motion signed by the committee was the one that set forth the rules that we have in our standing rules, which is very clear. It was in the file that was presented to us. And so it was very clear that they knew, or they all should have known, because it was one of their own resolutions, that they needed 4 affirmative votes, and that a note to report out in this condition, in this committee, the Ethics Committee, did not constitute an affirmative vote. And so it was, that's why parliamentarian has advised the chair that it wasn't properly before us, and now we have a motion to send it to inactive file. Anybody else wish to speak? There's been an objection, and go ahead, Senator, Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to say that on the motion to refer to the inactive file, it's a pretty drastic motion in light of what the chairperson of the Ethics Committee has told us, if it was just an error in what they did. But I mean, I agree that we should, as a body, only consider ethics resolutions that have the full support of the Ethics Committee. Because the Ethics Committee is acting on our behalf and doing the investigation, and they're hearing firsthand the witnesses and considering all the evidence. And we are pretty much reviewing their review of all of that. And but we have to rely on their findings. So I would like to have confidence in their findings and the vote. And I'm concerned that the work of the committee will be disregarded if what the chairperson says is correct. So I would like to give the committee the opportunity to clarify, and if they don't have enough votes, then we would not hear back from that committee. And if they have enough votes, then I think that we should not preclude ourselves from acting on whatever needs to be done according to our rules. I'm just a little concerned. I heard something about emotion in this argument, and I think it's emotional because it's very confusing, and I am concerned that our questions, I guess, are maybe not sufficiently addressed at this moment, but I guess I'm concerned that the irregularities that were discovered were not going to be brought to our attention, and I think by all means they should be brought to our attention, and we should, or the committee should have resolved it if that had been brought to their attention. But the chairperson has told us that the resolution was passed unanimously in the meeting. So I guess I just would like clarification by the committee if that is the issue that is at question here. Was it passed unanimously or was it not? And if we could just get that decided by the committee.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. Oh, go ahead.
Excuse me.
I'm sorry. The question that you posed, before us, all of us that reviewed, it was a very thick binder.
Mr. Speaker, I was just speaking on the motion.
No, I understand. And I'm just saying, all we can go on is, at least all I could go on, and we should go on, is what was in the binder. If there was a minutes of a meeting, then it should have been in the file so that we saw that there was a meeting with all those votes.
So you are debating what the chairperson of the committee
no, I'm
has
not.
said?
I'm just saying,
Can we get a fact? I mean, I don't know. If there is some kind of legal determination that has been made, I'd like to see it. If otherwise, I have no reason to doubt what the chairperson of the committee, we were not in that committee. I would like to know the facts.
But the only thing that was reported out to us was this voting sheet. There was no minutes where this was recorded. I'm not doubting that there was. I'm just saying, on what we have before us, or what was in the binder, I'm not sure, at least from my old life, extrajudicial is just not.
We are not deciding the matter today. We are deciding the motion whether to place it in the inactive file, which in effect kills this forever, or whether to let it go back to the committee or do something else with it, or to decide it here today. That's what we're deciding right now. We're not deciding the matter. We're deciding whether we send this to the inactive file and we take it out of our jurisdiction, or we send it back to the committee that actually has jurisdiction over this, or we act on it without having our facts straight here. That's really the motion that's before us, Mr. Speaker. It's really whether to send it back to the inactive file or not.
Going back to the inactive file was and would not have been my first choice. I was contemplating that it was going to be a refer back to committee. Unfortunately, this motion is the motion that is before us, and we have to.
Yes, that's why I'm speaking on that motion, Mr. Speaker, and nothing else. I'm speaking on the motion of whether to put it back in an active file or not, and I think, I guess I'm objecting to that motion because I think there are other motions available to us, for example, sending it back to the committee that might be more appropriate given what the committee chairperson has told us and given the fact that none of us was in those committee meetings, or only few of us were, and that we are going to rely on the committee very much in this matter, and I think we should if they need to do work, then let them do their work. And then we will consider the merits of it, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard on the motion? There's been various objections. Senator Espaldon?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I invoke my privilege at this time to be able to speak. A personal privilege and a House privilege, since this issue deals with my censorship. I've heard a lot of different things in the arguments of whether this should be, whether this motion should go through or not. The chairman of the Ethics Committee says it was a minor technical error. Mr. Speaker, the reflection of the record, or the record reflects that the vote was very clear, and the rules are very clear. The vote was 2 affirmative and 3 not. Now, if the chairman didn't check the vote when he let it out of committee, then that falls upon the chairman. That's his problem. But the vote on the record is very clear. There were only 2 affirmative votes when it really required 4. This is not before us. In fact, I agree with the motion, even though I'm not allowed to vote on it, to send it to the inactive file, because technically with that vote of 2 affirmative only, the report should have been there are not enough votes to sustain an ethics violation in this case. For the ethics chairman now to say it was a minor technical error is questionable. Now we're talking hearsay. There's no evidence whatsoever. And yes, we can ask members, but the fact is they voted. On top of it, they've had 4 to 5 months to correct this, and they didn't. They made no move towards to correct this. All the while, my name, my credibility, my character has been at issue. And for now, the chairman to say that he wants to save face for himself and perhaps the committee at the expense of my integrity is totally unfair. Totally unfair. I've gone through the whole process. And at the end of this whole process, what came out of the committee was a vote of 2 affirmative, which requires 4 to find an ethics violation, and only 3 to let out. And for people now to argue, and again, if they look at the rules, and of course, I've looked at the rules just to make sure, and through many processes, the committee did follow the rules. And for them now to say that they did not follow the rule of how many votes it should take, and now they want a second crack to bring it back so they can re-vote, that's almost double jeopardy. And you're going to let me string along because of a mistake? Or was it a mistake? Or is this another attempt to try to keep this in the press or keep this in public? That's totally unfair. I've held my tongue through all this. I've been waiting, yes, to bring it before this committee if we go into the committee of the whole. But I only found out last Friday, that there weren't even enough votes to let it out of committee. And now they want a second crack at it to change things. They've had 4 to 5 months to correct their mistake. And now we're arguing about whether or not it should die or not. I believe that really, on its face, because it did not have enough votes to find an ethical violation that's what this report says, that's what the voting sheet says, that really the ruling should be that the committee found that by the votes and by the rules, there was no ethical violation found. To try me a second time because everybody wants to get me in front of the thing is not fair. One of our speakers had the opportunity to serve, and that senator declined that opportunity to serve on the Ethics Committee. And now that senator wants to know. That senator had that ability, but refused the opportunity to sit on the Ethics Committee. That's totally unfair. This is not a drastic motion. You know, first of all, well, let me just reiterate, this is not a minor technical error. It's almost like, and just, excuse me, I don't mean to be crude, but perhaps in the simplest term, you can't have a baby unless you're pregnant. In this case, there was no pregnancy, and yet they want to have a baby. And yet they're saying a baby's born. It came out of the Rules Committee itself by the chairman of the by the Ethics Committee, excuse me, right? That there was a finding, and yet the votes don't reflect that. They don't. You know, and again, I begrudge nobody on their vote. That was their duty. Those who voted in the affirmative, I hold nothing against them. Those who voted to report out, God bless them. But in the end, a vote to report out is not an affirmative vote. And this resolution did not have, like the author of the mover of the motion said, did not have a notwithstanding clause to allow it to be on this agenda. I'm surprised and I'm grateful, right, that this is being brought up now, because I knew it was going to be brought up sometime this week. But at this point, technically, right, this issue is dead. The committee's record reflects that there were not enough votes. Regardless of what the chairman says, reflects that there is not vote. Who knows that at the very last second that some of the members of the Ethics Committee who may have agreed that perhaps it should move on, right, maybe have changed their mind when it came down to sign. For him to speak on behalf of everybody else and say this is what happened and that's why we should go ahead and prosecute further, after all these months of being able to and having the opportunity to correct, if it was an error, to correct that error, they have not done it. And now that they know or the chairman knows that I know that there were not enough votes, now he wants to go back and change it and get a revote? I've been having to suffer. I've had mental anguish. I've had to pray. I pray every day about this. My family has had to carry the burden. My integrity and my character and my honor have been in question. And I was allowing the process to go through, following the process all the way. And now we're going to say that we're going to, no, let's not follow the process. Let's not follow the rules. Let's keep this alive. When the fact remains there were not enough votes to have a finding that there was an ethical violation and there should be punishment behind it. It's my censorship is at stake. My name and reputation at stake. If they're so intent, if the chairman is so intent on bringing this back to try to figure out how we can get this ethical violation in front of everybody when he himself has been excused, is unfair. Totally unfair. For members of this body to speak up and say everybody should know, that's not the rules. The rules say I had, as the respondent, the ability to say whether I wanted an open or a closed hearing. I elected the closed hearing on the advice of my attorney. And like I said, the rule states that only until after this goes before the committee of the whole and the body votes that there was an ethical violation, then the records are public records. Otherwise, if after the committee of the whole, the body says, no, there was no finding of ethical violation, those records are sealed. So for anybody to make an argument right now without reading the rules and understanding what the rules are, that this needs to be open, those are not the ethics rules. Those are not. And I would have to at least submit in my mind, for the chairman now to come out and try to revert this back to committee so they can change the vote, right, is really almost the same standard that they're accusing me of, that I did not live my life so as to bring honor and respect to my office and the legislative body. By doing this, all of a sudden that calls into question if somebody else did not live their personal and public life so as to bring respect and honor to this body. In my opinion, and this is my opinion because I'm not allowed to vote on this motion before us, this should be dead. And if what should happen is what's right. What's right is there were not enough votes. This should be a dead issue at this point in time, right? And so, even though I can't vote, I would have to say that I would support this motion, bring it to the inactive file. Do people deserve to know? Perhaps, but that's not the rule. The rule is the committee had the opportunity to examine all the documents, to hear it, and everything else, and then they issued, and they may have agreed orally, but in writing, they did not. In writing, they did not. The force of law is in the written piece that came out of the committee. 2 affirmative only. It needs 4 to be reported out to have a finding that there is an ethical violation. The comments from the chairman should have been that there are not enough votes. If he would have done his job and inspected the record, the voting sheet. Now, if he would have inspected it and found that there were not enough votes, he could have at that time then gone on to his colleagues within the ethics committee and said, hey, listen, I thought you said that you were agreeing with this. But he didn't. Is that a fault of my own? No. Should I have to live with this stigma? No, because I've always maintained that I have done nothing unethical. And apparently, according to the voting sheets, it seems that way also. Several members did not find it as well. Only 2. That's what the voting record reflects. For us now to keep contemplating, well, we should bring it back, we should put him on trial, we should put him, that's double jeopardy. The committee has voted, and the vote was no. There is no finding of an ethical violation. They don't agree with the resolution. Only 2 did, and it required 4. I take exception to the way the chairman vehemently, kind of like, this is a minor technical error. This is not a technical error. This is the threshold issue. A threshold issue. This is not a technical error. If there was a technical error, it's on him. But at this point, it's over. The vote has been cast. If he wants another round to try to convince his colleagues within the ethics committee to change their votes, that is totally unfair. Totally unfair. I've held my tongue for a long time. Those who know me, and I thank all the people, and there are thousands of them, who have come up to me, communicated with me in some form or another to express their support for me, who know me and have asked and have told me that we know you, this is totally out of character for what you do. And I've thanked them for their support and their prayers. And they've stood behind me and said, hold your head up. And I said I had no problem holding my head up because I know what I did and what I didn't do. And one thing I am certain of, in my mind, I did not cross an ethical boundary that I'm responsible for. Other people within the whole scheme of things may have, but there is no evidence that points that I did. Perhaps some circumstantial evidence that would require a leap of faith to make that determination. Well, if he did this and that, and you connect enough dots, then yeah, you can reach that conclusion that there was an ethical violation. But from the record, I don't believe there was. In my heart, I believe I never crossed that line. For them now to get a second crack at me, at my name, at my integrity, at the expense, so that somebody can save face, their face, they want to save their face at the expense of my integrity, at the expense of my honor. That's not right. Mr. Speaker, colleagues, we have a lot of business to take care of. I am willing to put this and let this die. Otherwise, if it's not, then I will have to go on and really make some better arguments than I'm making right now. And I believe that there will be a lot of collateral damage to this, just for trying to oppose and trying to make sure that there is going to be an ethical violation that's going to be found. Because it's totally unfair. Totally unfair. The move of the amendment is correct. This should have never gone on to the agenda. Who's responsible to make sure that there were enough votes to get on the agenda? Again, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, and I don't hold any grudges against anybody. All I want to do and asking my colleagues to do is what's right. And what's right is to take a look at that record, the voting sheet, and realize there were not enough votes from the Ethics Committee, who heard all the complaints, to find that there was an ethical violation and that I should be punished for it. And by the way, punished at the highest levels for a claim that I violated a standard of ethical behavior, that I did not live my life so as bring my private and my personal and professional life so as to bring honor and respect to my office and the entire legislature. And yet they didn't cite anything of concrete. I don't want to argue the merits at this point, but all I'm saying is that for them now to get a second crack, after all these months, it's almost a year now, almost a year this has been hanging over my head. And they want to prolong this, even after the record reflects that there was not enough votes to find an ethical violation, after a year. It's not right. Justice not served that way. And like I said, all I ask is for this body to do the right thing and get rid of this complaint against me. Yeah, we had some guy file a complaint against me from Saipan, but even all those allegations, even the allegations we made were just allegations. And when it came down to the hearing, did he present any evidence? No. And that's why I had to believe that even some of the members of the Ethics Committee could not vote in the affirmative because they weren't sure. They may have had an inkling that maybe there was something wrong or maybe there wasn't, but they weren't sure. So they voted to report out only. To give the committee another chance to really try to bring this back after they already voted is just not right. And I believe that what we should be doing right now is do what's right. I won't be able to vote on this motion, basically to kill it right now, but I strongly believe that is the proper course because there was not enough votes according to the ethics rules within our body. It's over. And somebody's going to have to say, yes, it is over, and I apologize. That's all I'm saying. I can say, yes, I accept the apology. Now let's move on with the business at hand. We have a lot of issues to address ourselves with concerning what needs to be done in the days ahead. If you want to prolong this, then let's do that. But it will be to the detriment of this body. It will be to the detriment of the interests of our people to keep this issue, which has already been decided by the committee, and it's a no vote, right? To keep it alive just for the sake of a good, I don't know, soap opera maybe? Keep it going? When really the focus that we need to have is on the issues, the financial issues we have, the regulatory issues we have, the coming budget that's going to be coming up in which we're going to have to make some drastic cuts or decisions to make sure that we can function as a government. To keep this alive at the personal level because somebody wants to save face is not right. But especially if it's not at my expense and the expense of my honor, the expense of the integrity, my integrity, at the expense of my family and my supporters and the Highland as a whole. This issue needs to be put to rest now. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. You may close. You may.
So I believe my integrity was questioned in this regard, and many points were made into what actually happened in the Ethics Committee. And again, just to clarify for the record, the reason why it's a technical error is because the committee did not even need the voting sheet in submission. The vote was cast in a duly convened meeting as per the rules. Do we hear any of the Ethics Committee saying that they didn't vote to adopt it? On the title of the resolution, Committee on Ethics. In order to move anything in the Committee on Ethics, you need the proper votes. That's why it's a technical error. We didn't even need the vote sheet, but I didn't have legal counsel availed to us until after it was submitted to the legislature. And I only got wind on Friday that that we should address this error or address this oversight. But when the fact of the matter is, we didn't need the vote sheet. If it came out of the committee, it was duly adopted, else it would not have come out of the committee. So to paint this light, no, Mr. Chairman, my integrity is on the line here as well. It was some very pointed remarks. So to insinuate I just magically decided for the committee I'm going to submit this resolution, and for a year we didn't hear anybody object to it because it was duly adopted. So we could try to create this fallacy, or we can live in reality, is that the committee adopted it. Now trying to use this technicality to try to scapegoat the committee so that this body does not address the resolution at hand, and then questioning my integrity as to whether or not it was duly adopted or not, I do take exception with.
Thank
now,
you.
while I respect the judgment of your judgment as the presiding officer, I think it's still important to the people of Guam that this matter be duly resolved. So in keeping with Mason's...
we're going to be taking a vote and this body will decide what the proper action is. It won't be on my
I understand, Mr.
solo
Speaker,
action.
but I do take exception to the fact that it's been stated numerous times that the resolution was not duly adopted. It was duly adopted, and I'd be willing to take a lie detector test any day. Let's just ask if others would be able to do the same thing.
Thank you very much. You may
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. You mentioned a little earlier that in fact not all the members of this body had the opportunity to review the documents in your office. Now we are asking the members of this body to totally dispose of an ethics complaint that came before this body without being privy to that information. That's first and foremost an issue that I have, because I have not read the report, because it should rightfully be discussed here. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, if we don't deal with this issue, it's going to be an issue that is going to continue to haunt this body, because we owe it to our people. If in fact there was no ethical violation, then ultimately the decision of the members of the body, a majority of these members, will vote accordingly.
Point of information.
So I'm just saying, Mr. Speaker, how can I vote, point of order, on a document to dispose of it indefinitely out of this legislature when I have not been privy to it, and other members of this body also?
And again, I state to the record, my office sent written memos to every single member. Twice, my office called every single office.
If I may, Mr. Speaker, but you are asking members of this body who was not privy to that, in spite of the invitation, who have not read the contents.
I want to make it clear that I did not deny anybody the opportunity.
I'm just saying we owe it to our people, Mr. Speaker. We owe it to our people. Transparency and openness.
And we owe it to our people to take advantage of the opportunity when it was given to review it in camera.
Why behind closed doors, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker,
you want me to review a document that I believe rightfully should be discussed on this floor?
And then you can discuss it on the floor having read it.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. You know, it's very concerning that if irregularities were found in this report, that was not addressed prior to session today, and that we are here supposedly going to vote on a motion whether to move a bill into the inactive file or a resolution, and a resolution that you are saying is not properly before us. So it can only be one way. It's either properly before us or it's not. And if it's not properly before us, then we shouldn't even be discussing this today. It should not be placed on our agenda. Just like if you find that there's a bill that's not conforming to our rules, we don't discuss those. If there's no committee report with it, it doesn't conform with the rules in any other way, either we make a motion notwithstanding or we don't discuss those things. So I guess we need to just decide. If you're ruling that it's improperly before us, then it's improperly before us. So we don't have jurisdiction of this bill to send it to some inactive file, or this resolution, sorry. But, and I think then if it's not properly before us, then maybe all this discussion is moot, and you should just stick with that ruling, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, I'm going to take a short recess. Legislature back in order. Um, Did you wish to be heard? Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to clarify something. In the in-camera review, when you invited all the senators to come in and take a look at the Committee of Ethics binder, and thank you for affording us that time. The voting, there was a voting, there's minutes on the voting, and in the minutes it showed, it listed all the senators who voted in favor of the resolution, and then the excused absence, which was me. And hello? And so, then the voting sheet came around, because the voting sheet, from my understanding, and this is what everyone is contesting, and it seems very ambiguous, but I want to clarify for my colleagues that the voting sheet, there was either yes or no, and I included the report out only, because I believe that this was the voting sheet to be put on session floor. And I believe this vote on the resolution happened in sometime in the month of September, and the voting sheet came out later on after that. So some of the things that was curious to me was, of course, you know, I guess there was a due process to let everything take place before we put it on session floor, because this was a very delicate matter. And so I just wanted to make you know, to clarify for some of my colleagues, and in case there's some confusion, that if you didn't have a chance to go and with the invitation of the speaker to review these documents with the in-camera invites, and that in these documents, that it clearly shows the senators that were present and that voted unanimously, and then the voting sheet that was passed around later with the understanding that we were voting to put it onto session floor. And so I put report out only for session floor. So just to clear out any confusion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also just want to rise and just state for the record, I'm in agreement with the retiring speaker that as members of the Ethics Committee, we attempted to discharge our duties based on the standing rules and what the standing rules prescribe. We took time out of our schedules to review and re-review and meet and to seek advice from legal counsel in order to make the best decisions with regard to this issue. We took a lot of time to draft and take comments from all the members of the Ethics Committee to draft the resolution that was put forward. And it was my understanding that the vote to report out was giving the opportunity for the entire body to be able to, as a retiring speaker had put it, and many members had the opportunity to review those documents and review our findings in the in-camera review process that was afforded to us as members. So we want to be able to put it before the body and give everybody an opportunity to review all the documents and all the information that we were able to receive. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, voting in a legislative body should never be considered a technicality. Ever. If we vote to pass a measure in this body, that matters. And if you're voting on a resolution to determine the ethical conduct of a member, that matters. And if our process has certain steps, that matters. And if, especially in the irony of it being an ethical process, we somehow find ourselves trying to make it be okay to move forward with something that did not receive the votes necessary to move forward by calling it a technicality, that just doesn't add up at all for me, Mr. Speaker. I'm concerned, and the reason why I made the motion to place this in the inactive file is because the votes weren't there for it to be able to move forward. Some are of the mind that we should send it back to committee and let it be revoted on. And that concerns me, Mr. Speaker. That sounds, that looks quite unethical. If it required the votes in the affirmative to move forward and it wasn't there, then it's not there. And to say that it's one thing on a voting sheet, but it's another thing in the conversation, the voting sheet is the evidence. And if the whole proceeding of the party in question in the ethics investigation had to do with those kind of things, shouldn't we hold to the same standard on those kind of things, regardless of what's said or what's done? What does the evidence show with respect to the proceedings that we are supposed to follow? And there is a voting sheet that only says that there are 2 affirmative votes for the charges that were rendered. Now, maybe some members wanted to bring it before the body and allow everyone to review it, but the fundamental point is that the evidence was not compelling enough for everybody to take a firm affirmative stance at that time. And if now, in hindsight, everyone, or not everyone, but there are certain members who may or may not wish to go back and take that affirmative stand, that just doesn't feel very proper in terms of due process to an accused. It's like a verdict being rendered, and then all of a sudden, a jury member realizes that the jury's hung, and, oh no, I want to go back and I want to change my decision. Now, it's one thing if new evidence is presented, new people come forward, someone else files another charge because, oh no, this was not part of, but everything has been considered at this juncture, Mr. Speaker. And so, I moved to place this into the inactive file because for me the matter has been adjudicated. To re-adjudicate it without new evidence or any new proceedings, I really feel that that just does not look right, does not feel right, and does not sound right. It really does not feel ethical. There was some discussion about, do our people deserve to know? Do they not? Of course they do. I'm very much of the opinion that they do. In fact, I introduced a bill to create an publicly elected ethics commission. Involve the public. And if that is the law of the land and that's what's established and that's what we shall follow, we must always follow the law and the rules and what's in place. And with respect to this issue, it did not have the votes necessary to move forward. I'm concerned about the implications if it gets sent back and gets re-voted on, the votes change or they become more affirmative without any new evidence being presented. What does that say? And so I make the motion to place it into the inactive file because I believe that it has already been adjudicated. The party of interest talked about how this was a very long proceeding. It was a whole year, and you know, there's been a lot of stories about this in the media. There's a lesson in it for all of us. There's a lesson in it even up to this point, where the question now before this body isn't just that of the member, but it's that of whether or not we're going to accept the fact that it required 4 votes and the 4 votes were not there. Now, if they were there, like I said, in some meeting or in some discussion or even in some minutes, that's one thing. But in the official voting sheet, the official documentation, the evidence, that's the decision that was rendered. And it will be this body that decides whether or not that decision is going to be honored or is going to be reconsidered in the absence of any new evidence that previously resulted in it not being as definitive or not definitive enough for 4 members, just 4 members, to vote yes on it. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for walking us through this, this deliberation. This is not easy at all. Even raising this concern is not easy, but it's definitely something that needs to be discussed, and I'm grateful for all of our members participating in the discussion. I look forward for our process forward at this time, Mr. Speaker.
Send the resolution back to, to the inactive file. There's been an objection. All those in favor of There's been a call for roll call. Please call the roll.
Senator Atta. Senator Atta, aye. Senator Uggan. Senator Uggan, nay. Senator Castro. Senator Castro, pass. Speaker Cruz.
Pass.
Speaker Cruz, pass. Senator Eswadon. Senator Eswadon, excused. Senator Esteves. Senator Esteves, nay. Senator Lee. Senator Lee, nay. Senator Morrison. Senator Morrison, aye. Senator Muña. Senator Muña, aye. Senator Nelson. Senator Nelson, nay. Senator Rodriguez. Senator Rodriguez, pass. Senator San Augustine. Senator San Augustine, pass. Senator San Nicolas. Senator San Nicolas, aye. Vice Speaker Terlahi. Vice Speaker Terlahi, pass. Senator Torres. Senator Torres, aye. Senator Castro. Senator Castro, pass. Speaker Cruz.
Aye.
Speaker Cruz, aye. Senator Rodriguez. Senator Rodriguez, pass. Senator San Augustine. Senator San Augustine, pass. Vice Speaker Terlahi. Vice Speaker Terlahi, nay. Senator Castro. Senator Castro, nay. Senator Rodriguez. Senator Rodriguez, pass. Sorry. Senator Rodriguez, nay. Senator Snogstein. Senator Snogstein, aye.
On Resolution 239-34 COR, there are 7 ayes, 7 nays. One excused absence. Motion fails. Senator Adams.
Mr. Speaker, I move to place resolution. Was that resolution number? 239 back to committee.
There's been a motion to place Resolution 239 in committee. Any objection? There being none, Resolution 239 is referred back to committee. There's a hearing at 5:30. Let's recess at this point until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.